Most whiskey only ever sees one barrel. These didn't stop there, though. When whiskey first goes into a barrel, it usually goes into new charred oak. That charring process isn't just cosmetic. The fire caramelizes the raw sugars that are naturally found in the wood and breaks down structural components like lignin and hemicellulose. As the spirit matures, it extracts flavors like vanilla, baking spice, caramel, and also tannin from the wood. That's where all of the flavors that we've come to think about when it comes to American whiskey come from. For most whiskey, that single barrel is the defining factor of its character. But that's not how all whiskeys are finished. Nowadays, there's a lot of producers that are doing cool, funky, almost experimental stuff when it comes to finishing off their bourbons, ryes, and scotches. Something that you see a lot nowadays is reusing barrels from wineries or cognac producers or any other number of things and finishing your whiskey in there instead of just letting that plain charred oak speak. When you do this, the whiskey's not extracting those oak compounds from the charred wood. What it's doing instead is it's interacting with the wood grain and pulling out the flavors of whatever wine or spirit was in that barrel before. The best versions of this feel integrated and precise, not like somebody dumped a bottle of wine into a barrel of whiskey. The worst ones feel like a gimmick. Now, Scotch producers over in Scotland have been doing stuff like this for decades, if not longer. You see a lot of scotches that are finished in sherry oak. Other producers all around the world have also started experimenting with the concept. A great example of a Scotch producer that does this is the Glenlivet, with their 14-year aged whiskey that is finished in cognac casks. Glenlivet 14 is a Speyside single malt Scotch that undergoes secondary maturation in ex-cognac barrels. After its primary aging in traditional oak, it goes into these cognac barrels, and that adds a layer of depth and complexity that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. Glenlivet is one of the foundational distilleries of Speyside and is often credited with being one of the most influential producers in the modern category of Scotch. Their house style is more elegant and normally features things like orchard fruit and focuses on balance as opposed to peat or heavy oak use. At its core, Glenlivet's identity is fruit-forward and balanced. Normally from a Glenlivet bottle that's not finished in some sort of specialty cask, you're getting things like green apple, pear, honey, maybe a little bit of vanilla from the oak, nothing crazy, and you're not getting any real peat influence whatsoever. Their whiskeys are generally light to medium body and really approachable and kind of easy to drink for a new Scotch drinker. Now, when you take that 14-year whiskey and you finish it off in these cognac barrels, it definitely adds some noticeable flavor differences. For one, you get this kind of dried fruit, almost like a raisin or apricot. You also get this kind of subtle grape character. I've always said chocolate-covered cherry, but I think that's more of a raisiny quality. Either way, this stuff comes out completely different than the way that it went in, and the difference is worth its weight in liquid gold. The finished product, when they finally bottle that Glenlivet 14-year that's finished in cognac casks, is almost dessert style. It's much heavier and richer and more complex than what goes into the barrel initially. Because cognac itself is a barrel-aged grape distillate, those barrels contain really concentrated fruit aromas and still have some residual oak character. And these things integrate themselves beautifully into that lighter Speyside style of Scotch. This is for people who want to up their Scotch game. People that have a bottle of Glenlivet or something else on their shelf right now, and they want to spend a couple bucks more and really be able to notice the difference. This is also a great option for bourbon drinkers who want to explore Scotch a little bit more. This stuff's not quite as light as your base entry-level Glenlivet, so it definitely leans a little bit more toward that bigger, more rounded and rich style of whiskey. Now, that's a Scotch producer leaning into secondary maturation, which, like I mentioned, they've been doing for quite a while. But American producers have also taken this concept, and they've gone in a lot of different directions. Tommyrotter is, or was, a distillery in Buffalo, New York that used Napa Valley wine casks to finish their bourbon. After first aging in new charred American oak barrels, they then transfer the whiskey into used Napa Valley red wine casks. Now, you may have noticed that I said was. Tommyrotter Distillery was located in Buffalo, New York. The reason I say was is that they're no longer operating, at least not the same way that they were. From what I understand, they're still making their unaged spirits, but they closed the doors to their distillery a few years back, and what we have of this Tommyrotter Napa Valley Cask Finished Bourbon is all that's left. Because of that, the price is great. You're talking under 20 bucks, and it is really, really tasty stuff. So while they have since ceased bourbon production, this finite amount of bourbon that remains definitely shows why they stood out in the craft bourbon market. Now, their bourbon that's not finished in the Napa Valley wine casks is pretty standard straight bourbon whiskey. You have that classic caramel, vanilla, brown sugar flavor profile. It's got a little bit of heat because it wasn't aged for super long, and it doesn't have a ton of tannin. It was on the sweeter side. The regular bourbon was familiar and comforting, like most bourbons are at that entry level that aren't swill. Now, when they poured that bourbon into a Napa Valley wine cask, everything changed for that spirit. You wind up with a little bit of tannin, you wind up with a lot of deep red flavors being integrated into the profile, and that plays really well with that baking spice and caramelized sort of flavor profile that you're getting from their regular bourbon. Not only did it affect the flavor, it also affects the structure. It definitely feels a little bit less sweet and a little bit more lifted. So while this still does taste like bourbon, it tastes like a much more complex and interesting version. This is a great bottle for bourbon drinkers who are just looking to try something new, and also for people that aren't really sure what they like and they don't want to, be $50 in the hole to try a new bottle of whiskey. Like I said, this stuff is like 20 bucks or less, so risk and reward, you can decide on your own where the balance is, but I think it's a no-brainer. So that's wine finishing applied to America's native spirit. But I want to go in a totally different direction. You see, I'm a big rye guy. I love rye. I love the spice. I love the little bit more dry character that ryes tend to have. And I really love when people do specialty cask finishes on ryes. Now, the reason that I love this so much is because when you're finishing rye in the right barrel, you're not adding sweetness or changing everything. It's just like the other ones, a different way of integrating flavors into that base spirit. There's a lot of great examples, but I want to look at 3 of them real quick. The first one is Redemption Rum Cask Finished Rye. Redemption is known for high rye mash bills and being more grain forward than a lot of other producers out there. This definitely lends itself to experimenting by finishing your whiskeys in casks that don't overpower the base spirit, but instead add something new. So if you watched my video last week, you know that rye is spicy, peppery, and can sometimes have a little bit of a citrus edge to it. They tend to be a lot drier than their bourbon counterparts in America. Taking that Redemption bourbon and putting it in a rum cask is definitely something that brings out a whole new character. Rum casks tend to emphasize residual sugar compounds that are absorbed into the wood, rounding out the edges and softening the spice of a rye. It doesn't kill the spice, it plays with it. Think sweet heat. If you're a fan of Mike's Hot Honey or something like that, it kind of translates into this rum finished rye a little bit. At the price this stuff is, this is for anybody who just wants to experiment with rye a little bit. If you've never had a rum finished rye, you can definitely reach out and grab a bottle of this without it hurting your wallet too much. And it's also my favorite example of any spirit being finished in a rum barrel, except maybe besides rum, but that wouldn't count, I don't think, right? Now, we're definitely jumping up in price here, closer to like $100, but my absolute favorite rye that's finished in specialty casks has to be New York's Hillrock Sauternes Finished Rye. Hillrock does a lot of these specialty cask finished whiskeys. You can find Pinot Noir, Sauternes, Cabernet, and all sorts of other stuff that I'm not thinking of right now. So their Sauternes Finished Rye is finished in Sauternes barrels. If you don't know what Sauternes are, those are Batra-sized wines that come from France and are world-renowned for their longevity and their high sweetness. Hillrock, located in New York's Hudson Valley, is known for their grain-to-glass style of production. Everything from growing their grain to harvesting to distilling and bottling is done on-site. That's kind of hard to find when it comes to whiskey producers at large. The estate control allows them to shape the rye's character from the field into the bottle. Now, their base rye is bold and peppery and has a serious backbone of spice. I think they take a lot of pride in the fact that they grow their grain right next to the distillery, and that's why they let that grain shine so hard in their base entry-level rye. I call it entry-level, but you're still talking close to $100 for a bottle of it. This is a distillery that emphasizes polish and structure and really lets their work do the talking for them. Now, putting that rye into a barrel that used to hold Sauternes is really transformative. I'm talking adding apricot, honey, tropical fruit, and sweetness to a spicy, bombastic rye. That integration is almost like nothing else you can find out there on the spirits market. This stuff doesn't come out sugary or overly sweet. It just gets all of those aromas that make Sauternes so bright and bakes them into that spicy profile. This doesn't really round off the rye like the rum barrel does for Redemption. Instead, it layers it and makes it way more complex. Like I said, this stuff does have a pretty hefty price tag, so this is for people who want to level up their rye game, buy a gift for someone that they know loves rye, or even if they just think they like whiskey. This stuff is seriously impressive, and I've yet to meet a single person that didn't agree. Now, while the popular choice for secondary maturation is definitely using barrels that used to hold a different type of alcohol, there is one other producer that I think is doing maybe the coolest barrel finish in the country. That's going to be Catskill Provisions, and they're also finishing their rye in something special. Now, what's that, you might ask? Honey barrels. Catskill Provisions Honey Barrel Finished Rye Whiskey is a rye whiskey that undergoes secondary maturation in barrels that previously aged honey. After primary aging, the whiskey goes into these honey barrels and they add sweetness and depth that you definitely couldn't get otherwise, and probably not from any other type of used barrel. Catskill Provisions is located in New York, and they emphasize locally sourced ingredients from their grain all the way to their honey. This finishing program reflects a serious focus on local agricultural identity and also just making darn good tasting stuff. This is a distinctly New York interpretation of specialty cask-finished rye. So this stuff starts with that same backbone of rye that we've been talking about, but adding it into the honey barrel completely changes everything in a way that the Sauternes casks and the rum casks cannot. I like to tell people that this is almost like buying an old fashioned, but it's not quite that. The thing that it's definitely not is honey flavored whiskey. When you pick up a bottle of this, don't be thinking of Jack Honey or Jim Beam's honey flavored whiskey. It's nothing like that. It doesn't have that level of sweetness and cloying syrupy quality to it. What it is it's a rye forward rye, but it has that integrated honey profile that adds a little bit of waxiness, a little bit of weight, and of course a little bit of honey sweetness, but it doesn't overpower it and it doesn't turn into liqueur the way some other producers make their honey flavored whiskeys. To me, this is best enjoyed just poured over ice, as if it were an old fashioned in and of itself. This is seriously complex and it is seriously delicious. It is one of my favorite bottles to pick up on a regular basis. So here's the real question. Which one should you buy? If you're a Scotch drinker or you like elegance and fruitiness, then definitely go with the Glenlivet 14. If you're a bourbon drinker and you're looking to just try something a little bit different, grab that Tommyrotter that's finished in the Napa wine casks. And make sure you do it quick because, like I said, when it's gone, it's gone. And if you like rye but you want something a little softer, grab that rum barrel finished Redemption Rye. Or if you want to step up your game and get something seriously elegant and seriously complex, the Hillrock Sauternes Finished Rye is beautiful stuff. And if you want something unique and definitively local, go with that Catskill Provisions Honey Barrel Finished Rye. You can find a link down in the description that'll show you all 5 of these bottles. And we have a lot more stuff. There's so much out there when it comes to these specialty casks finish nowadays that I could never cover all of them. But these 5 are for sure my favorites. If you've had a whiskey that is finished in a different type of cask, please let me know down in the comments. What was it? How'd you like it? And what are you looking to try next? Don't forget to like, comment, share this video, do all those things that push us up in the algorithm. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me this week. I hope you learned something. I hope you found your next bottle. And even if not, I hope you just enjoyed yourself. So yeah, adios.